Okay.
The audacity.
All right. We're doing document 44, James Winthrop, right? The Anti-Federalist. So what is the source?
The Federalist and other constitutional papers.
I know I talked about this a little bit earlier in another video, right? So we had the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, right? So those are the other constitutional papers. The main idea of the Federalist papers were this idea of there were proponents for a central body of government, right? A federal government. A federal government is our modern government now, right? The bicameral system, the House, the Senate, everything like that. Anti-Federalist, they were proponents of the Articles of Confederation. They want sort of state legislation, states to run their own government. That's hence why we have state governments and a federal government, right? Anti-Federalists influence that. Okay, who wrote this document?
E.H. Scott. No.
Wait, John Winthrop.
John. James Winthrop.
I think there's another guy from another source. Yeah.
The person you said, Crystal, is the person who wrote the source, right? So the Federalist and other constitutional papers is what I saw is basically a collection of all the Federalist and anti-Federalist papers. So that he made a giant collection, basically wrote kind of a book about it, but it was just it's sort of like Voices of Freedom, right? So that's who that is. But the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, what I talked about earlier, is those ideas of papers for a strong central government and papers against a strong central government. So James Winthrop, who is he? What makes him important?
He's a jurist and librarian.
Okay, so you can say Harvard librarian.
He did work at Harvard.
Are you sure?
Yeah. He was a librarian at Harvard from 1772 until 1787.
Yeah, Harvard librarian.
Yes. So librarian at
Harvard librarian.
Anti-Federalist.
Same thing. Anti-Federalist. That's the other one I'm looking for. All right, so I already addressed what the Anti-Federalists were. Let's sort of think about this. The first document, 42, was sort of the for. This is now the against to this idea of central government. So it gives you both perspectives towards the thing. All right, what is the topic? What is this document talking about? I have two answers here, so any of those I'll be cool with.
The arguments of the Anti-Federalists, like of what they thought of the central government.
It is the argument, but that wouldn't be the topic, right? Because the whole idea of the Anti-Federalist paper is it's an argument, so that's just like sort of a general assumption.
What was the question?
So what is the topic? Like, what is it talking about? The main idea.
That individuals need to have their rights protected and that a centralized government couldn't do that.
So that's one of the answers, right? Individual sovereignty.
Tyranny of the majority.
Okay, I just questioned that.
Do you need a spelling?
I said I'm a historian, not a language arts teacher.
INDIVIDUAL.
Alright, so this idea of individual sovereignty, so what Katie was talking about sort of, and also what we talked about in the last document, right? So having your own right to dictate how you are being governed. That was one. The other one I was looking for was federalism, right? And you're probably like, well, he's an anti-federalist, why would the topic be federalism? But look at sort of what he is talking about, right? He's talking about this idea of we need sort of states to have their own rights, but there still needs to be that overlaying sort of constitution, right? So you have two different sets of government. The idea of federalism is you have a state sort of government and you also have a national government, right? So these two conflicting governments that sort of check and balance each other, right? But not like don't think like the checks and balances, like that's a separate thing, but like what I'm mentioning in checks and balances is you have a state that keeps the national government in check, you have a national government that keeps the state government.
Would it be like better to say like, oh, we're the balanced power?
You could say that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at that. Balance, yeah. And he mentions his power in it as well. Yeah, you could add that. I'm gonna add that. Balance power. So like you have three ideas here you can have for a topic, right? Individual sovereignty, federalism, or balancing power, right? Any of those would be good, and they all kind of have the same idea. So like just so you get that sort of general consensus of what you're talking about. All right, when was this document? 1787.
Yes.
Why 1787 important?
It was before the ratification.
Before the ratification, right? So going back to the other document, and sort of like that's the idea of the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist paper, right? These are before the Constitution is ratified. It's giving the pros and the cons for both sides and what should be included, what shouldn't be included. But that goes into the historical context, which is this idea of Federalist v. Anti-Federalist. Right, this is a major sort of focal point of American like politics and American government from about 87 to 89, 1787 to 89. That's when you see a lot of them. I think the first document was the Brutus one in 1783, right? That was sort of the first rendition of an anti-federalist paper that we see. Later on, Brutus gets adopted and becomes sort of the front runner of these anti-federalist papers when we're talking about. And also when you think about federalists and anti-federalists, this is mainly in New York, more of like the northern part of the colonies, right? But they do mention, especially in this one, they mention southern colonies, right? They mention sort of all of them, but like they're based in New York, so just have that in your head too. So like if there is a where, when in talking about federalists and anti-federalists, a good assumption could always be New York. This one, again, you can put New York, but it's also just talking about America. So like that's why I leave the where out of this one as well. All right, audience, who's this document talking to? I'll give you a hint. It's an argument. So who is the argument posed to? So James Winthrop is arguing something. Who is supposed to be on the opposite side? Who is supposed to be hearing this argument? Federalists. There you go. Right? And you can see in the document as well, right? It mentions Alexander Hamilton, one of the major Federalists, right? So it's like he said, Alexander Hamilton said something about checks and balances. Well, this is what we think about checks and balances, right? So it's an argument between the two documents. So the Federalists are talking to the Anti-Federalists, right? They're trying to basically convince them why a central body of government is important. Federalists are trying to say, hey, no, central body of government is not good. We want rights, we want liberties, we want Bill of Rights, we want all these different things. We don't want to go back to a monarchy. We want to go to freedom, right? So it's a discussion between the two. That's a good way to view it. So like you can put arguments. / discussion. All right, what lens can we see? Political, right? So for these documents, we're dealing with a lot of politics. So it's your best bet will always be political when viewing these. But political in what aspect though? What is a major thing we can take from this? Like what perspective did you try and portray to us? But like what is the goal of the Anti-Federalists? I kind of mentioned a little bit.
States power.
There you go, local laws. Or / state powers. Right, so you can view this lens and be like, all right, we're talking about balance of power, right? How much power should the state have? How much should the central government have? Or should the state have all the power? Or should the central government have all the power, right? That's when you view these lenses, that's how you want to do it. You always want to look at it and pose questions to yourself, relating back to the topic, right? Then you could also talk about like this idea of individual sovereignty, right? Individual sovereignty, that kind of associates with states' power, right? States have their own rights to make their own laws and govern themselves. Kind of give that idea of individual sovereignty to that. It's not more of a national sovereignty. Or, as we talked about in the last one, popular sovereignty, right? You can associate that back to that again, associating back to the future and past things. Yes, Crystal?
Would it also be social because it's of two groups, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that are talking?
No, only because the Federalists and Anti-Federalists are arguing politics. They're not arguing social lives, right? They're arguing how their lives are being affected by government and things like that, so it will always be associated with politics. Now, if it was saying something about like laws that affect a citizen or something, you could argue social in that sense. You'd be like, well, this is affecting our daily life, right? So far, them arguing about what a government should look like is not gonna affect their lives right then and there. If it was to affect, that's how you can bring social into this. So yeah, argument. Why is this document being written? What is the argument, right? What is James Winthrop trying to say?
Why are you looking at me?
Were you looking at me?
To argue individual sovereignty instead of centralized power.
I basically, essentially what you said, I just said state sovereignty is better than central power. Right, so this idea of state sovereignty is better than central power. So essentially what Brianna said, just different verbiage. Essentially that's kind of like the basis of the Anti-Federalists, right? So like I said, the Bill of Rights, the creation of sort of a separate body of governments different from sort of a federal system, like a major central power. They all were about states' right because they believe, in the document as well, they believe laws that are affected for the industrial part of America, right, the northern part, is different from laws that will affect the southern part. How would that be equitable, right? You can't make a law affecting Massachusetts people when people in Georgia have no way to relate to that, right? So just how large and how different America is at this time, just having one body of government wouldn't be suitable enough to govern everybody. That idea is sort of what they argue and why they argue, right? And then bringing it back, right? We have this idea of balance of powers. It creates this idea of federalism. We have this idea of individual sovereignty. Look through it through a political lens, right? It's their argument to the Federalists, and that's how you can like bring all the points together. So yeah, any questions, comments, concerns? All right.